Hello, everyone, and welcome back to This Week in Enterprise Tech. I'm Hyun Park from Amalgam Insights here with Charlie Araujo. How are you, Charlie? I see you're
I
suited
am.
up.
I am. And he guesses what I'm doing in the minute we finish recording today's podcast.
Wild guess.
Going to the Mets game. It's
All right.
actually it is sweltering hot here in New York. It's 100 degrees today. My air conditioners are just running nonstop. I think the Mets are 2-8 in their last 10, dropped
Oh
seven of the
boy.
last eight. It's been horrible, but it's always a good day to go to the ball game. So super excited. My in-laws are in town, and we're going to run out to the baseball game after this and just have a good time. Doesn't matter. And I'm hoping I'm bringing them some good luck. Probably not, because I'm normally not good luck for my teams. But hey, we're gonna hope for the best. How about you? How is life on the other coast?
Oh, it's been good. I just spent the weekend singing backup for Andrea Bocelli over up in Napa. We had
Oh,
Babyface show
wow.
up as a guest star as well, and our job was to sing some oohs and ahs in the background while having the best seat in the house. So it was not a bad weekend.
I was gonna say, not a bad gig. Some
Mhm.
some celebrity sightings and a little wine to go with it. I mean, there are worse ways to spend a weekend.
Sure, absolutely.
And then we come back to this reality of IT and technology and try to make it fun and interesting. But we're gonna do our level best today, and we're going to start with a phrase, a word that I'm sure we've never uttered on the show, and I'm not confident we'll ever say it again. But we're going to open today's show with news about a very important meeting with some of the leading AI companies and Pope Leo. I mean, how,
Yes.
how did we get to talk about that? So I, I think this is a really interesting scenario, and we often talk on the show about being wary of all the hype of AI, but I think it's fair to say that if the Pope convenes a summit on the potential risks of AI to humanity, that there's at least some nugget of truth in there. So, I mean, what was your take on this really groundbreaking meeting?
Yeah, so Pope Leo met with many of the big AI tech companies that you and I would all recognize: Google, Meta, IBM, Anthropic, Cohere, Palantir, all of them meeting with the Vatican to talk about the future of AI and ethics. We had Wilson Sonsini law firm there. It's like all of the big Silicon Valley ish AI names coming to Rome, coming to the Vatican City to talk to the Pope. I find that fascinating, just that AI and religion, basically, or social topics can get so fundamentally linked together. And this talks to how AI isn't just a technological decision at this point. It's not just a financial decision at this point. There are broad ranging ethical and social and I guess even religious aspects to come in as well. And I find this especially interesting because, of course, most of you know there's a new pope that just came in after the old pope passed away. The new pope, Pope Leo, is both from Chicago and was a math major. So by normal standards, he's actually pretty tech savvy, probably as tech savvy as you're going to get from a religious leader. And so if anybody is going to be well positioned to I guess change the Catholic Church based on what is happening in AI, it's going to be this guy, Pope Leo.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting from a number. I mean, we're obviously used to the major AI players traveling the world and talking to world leaders of various sorts, but in almost all cases, it's because they have regulatory authority over them in some ways, and they're sort of hedging their bet. And this one is interesting. So, first of all, this was convened, right? This was the Pope himself instigating this, making artificial intelligence sort of a chief issue that they have to address. And certainly, I think that what it speaks to for me is that, I mean, this could be as simple as if you're a tech leader, how often do you get the opportunity to meet the Pope? So it could be as simple as that.
Right.
If the Pope invites you to show up, you show up. But I also think it does speak to the fact that the challenges that we have from a societal and cultural perspective, that this AI, despite its shortcomings, which we're going to talk about a little bit later in the show today, um, is a cultural force, right? It is fundamentally shifting and changing the way we think about how we interact with technology, and it has far-reaching implications. If it works, even if it doesn't work, frankly, it has some far-reaching implications. And I think that's what this is. So for me, the big takeaway, if you're a CIO, if you're an enterprise IT leader, is that it's easy to forget that AI is about more than just the technology. It is that there's a huge swath of organizational cultural dynamics that are at play here, and you need to be aware of it. So for me, I don't know that this is going to have a dramatic impact on the technology landscape per se, but it certainly is a reminder of what's really at stake.
Yeah, I think the most interesting practical aspect of this is that the Vatican is concerned about the power of unregulated AI and is pushing for the major tech players from Google and Microsoft and OpenAI on down to figure out some level of regulation. And of course, the Roman Catholic Church is a global institution. So as such, whatever they are asking for has these implications that are going to push not just the United States, but really every country that has some major Catholic influence to have to consider what to do to regulate AI going forward.
Yep, we've been talking about regulation AI for a long time, and just proof that this is a march that will be continuing for a while. Other news, and this, I guess, sort of news, coming off of, I think it was last week, Cisco had their Cisco Live event, or maybe it was the week before, and there's a story in Forbes that was published, and the title of it is Jeetu Patel bringing Cisco investors a Satya and Nadella moment. And so to me, there was two reasons I wanted to bring this article forward. First, there's a little bit of a personal connection. I actually, on a random day, met Jeetu Patel at the Ritz-Carlton in Dana Point, just on a social level. We happened to share a table. If you've ever been there, they have this amazing rooftop deck that overlooks the water, and it's sort of communal seating. Got seated next to him, got chatting, and turned out he was the Cisco executive but at the time, he wasn't anyone had ever heard of. And so, but I really liked him. I was very impressed with him. And so I ended up sort of connecting with him on LinkedIn and following his career. And so it's sort of fun to see this almost meteoric rise over the last decade, as he sort of elevated into this position, is now talking. I mean, that's rarefied air to be talking about a Satya Nadella moment here, right? So, but I think it's also instructive from my standpoint because it speaks to, I think, a bit of a new era that we're entering, or maybe have entered. And that is that for a lot of the last decade, much of what separated companies that were winners and not tended to be really marketing and positioning and strategy around that. I mean, you look at Salesforce, right? I mean, maybe at the very beginning, Salesforce had a product innovation sort of led ethos, but most of their success has been that they've been absolute sales and marketing powerhouse. And I think you could say the same about a lot of the major players over the last decade. And what I think is interesting here is that the reason that Jeetu Patel is getting so much positive press here is because he is driving a bit of an innovation renaissance at Cisco as they attempt to adapt for this AI era. So whether you think it's hype or not, I do think it's just interesting. And I think you're seeing it actually with OpenAI, right? OpenAI is clearly a product innovation driven company, as well as I would say Microsoft has been doing very much a similar sort of motion here recently. And so I think it's this interesting era of, and certainly as someone who works at a software company, looking across this landscape, and we all have so many cards we can play. Where are you focusing your energy? And I think it's a good sign. I mean, I think it's if you're a technologist anyway, I think it's exciting to see this period where product innovation is really leading the charge.
Yeah, it's not that every tech company has done this, but there does seem to be an advantage right now to have a CEO who has some sort of product background, like Satya Nadella. He was once upon a time a lowly product manager doing, I think it was a Microsoft Teams equivalent, unified communications demos back in the day, like 20 years ago. And now he's the CEO. And I think there's this need right now to figure out how to actually talk about the products and not just sell this broad vision that is so vague that nobody can figure out what's going on. The CEOs that are able to actually dig a little deeper into the operations, whether it be through product development and product management, such as Patel and Nadella, or the way that Tim Cook can dig so deeply into supply chain. It is an obvious advantage over those who really are more on the sales side, which I'm not going to name names there, not quite as complimentary, but we've seen a number of CEOs along those lines.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting, and I think it's, to be honest, harder. I will say. I mean, I think that to a large extent, one of the challenges with enterprise tech, if you look across many of the most established sectors, is they became very homogenized. It was very, very difficult to differentiate at a product level. And ironically, you talk about how you need more than this broad vision. One of the things that I've counseled in my analyst days, right, I counseled countless organizations around is that the vision was critical because it was the only thing you could actually differentiate on. It was the only thing you could sort of stick your claws into and say, okay, I understand their vision. They're going the same place I am. And now I think there is an opportunity, but the stakes are very high. I mean, it is expensive. Well, it's expensive to invest in product innovation, period. It's difficult to do to find that niche that is you're able to drive differentiation around. And it's incredibly risky if you get it wrong. And I think that's actually the challenge facing Cisco. I mean, Cisco is still a monster organization. Their technology still is, running the back end of massive amounts of the tech stack. But we tend not to be talking about them a whole lot anymore. And so, them trying to elevate that. In fact, that's some of the criticism here that really what Cisco is doing is repackaging a lot of NVIDIA stuff and yada, yada, yada. I mean, I think trying to reinvigorate that is challenging, and it's a risk. And I think that's true of any company. And if I put the CIO hat back on, it's, well, where do you then, how much do you weight that product innovation? How much value do you put on it in a space that for enterprise tech is relatively mature, right? I mean, how much value are you getting from it? Is it worth the risk? I think that's an interesting question that every CIO has to be thinking about right now.
Yeah, but at the same time, you've got the data center world is actually changing a lot because of AI. You have to figure out what your mix of chips are, and then how to get the network correctly, and then how to figure out your security strategy on top of that. And I think mixing that with this, call it trendiness of generative AI, and the executive wishes to be able to dig a little bit more deeply into operations with natural language versus the reality of having to translate what is still an extremely technical and complex world to the executive office. That's probably going to end up being a Cisco challenge to try to figure out how much can we actually translate from a networking and data center and security perspective to the executive office before it gets to be too much. Because if it's not Cisco that does it, like, not many other companies are well positioned to both dig deeply into the tech and be able to get the CIO's attention.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be quite a challenge for them. I think in general, and I agree with you. I think, part of the reason that Cisco sort of landed where they were really isn't even their issue. It's that the reality is that there was very little change. When the enterprise tech stack workloads were fairly consistent, their data throughput was consistent. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of going on, right? And now AI has upended everything across the board, including at this level. So I think that will be interesting. And speaking of AI, absolutely staggering pair of sort of news announcements that hit the exact same time, and the irony is like rich. So Salesforce's AI research arm released a piece of research that talked about the efficacy of benchmarks, I guess, really, when I'll let you explain this, but of benchmarks when it comes to agentic AI sort of workloads, and their how well they work. And at the same time as that, and in full disclosure, right, as far as I understand it, Salesforce AI research does operate independently, right? So it's a funded arm. But at the same time, where this report is basically saying, hey, these AI agents are not very good at actually working, Salesforce announces a price increase. So around all of this, which I think is just absolutely fascinating how these two are sort of living, and sort of really speaks volumes to the state of AI today.
Yeah, so starting with the research side, because I love research, Salesforce AI Research came out with this interesting paper showing that, uh, of course, we are having trouble benchmarking business processes such as sales or configure price quote or marketing type processes. So Salesforce created this new benchmark called CRMArena-Pro, meant to figure out how well LLMs are able to negotiate some of the more complex capabilities associated with service cases or sales lead routing or lead qualification, things that are very specific to the revenue office, and basically finding that LLMs are only able to.
And I should add, not uncoincidentally, the very use cases that Agentforce is predominantly designed to execute against, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Obviously, these are Salesforce-centric use cases, but of course, Salesforce has a very vested interest in trying to figure out whether LLMs work well with these use cases, and found that basically LLMs were able to get through about 60% of the time. 40% of these were failures, which I think passes the sniff test. Like if I were to guess how well LLMs are going to get through complex business and sales use cases, yeah, I can see, 50-60% feels about right. I don't think you'd get much better than that. But so we're saying, well, generative AI and AI in general is still having some real problems getting through these complex use cases. So in response, of course, on the business side, Salesforce looks at this and says, okay, it's time to either raise prices or rationalize prices, depending on your perspective.
Well, so first of all, we should add a couple things to this particular research when we look at it. Is not only was it about that 58% was their number, so about 60%, but that was on the single step sort of workflow or single step sort of actions, right? When it became multi-step, i.e., more complex workflows, that number fell into the 30% range, which is pretty shocking because most business use cases are in fact multi-step.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that was fairly shocking. The maybe not as shocking, or maybe more positively, the things that the agents were best at were things that were much more workflow centric, right? So things where we have a more defined workflow. And again, I try to explain to people how to think about this. And in many cases, the way you train an agent like this is you give it instructions much like you would give a human. Right.
Mm-hmm.
This is the business logic, and no different than a human. The more clear that business logic is, the more clear the process is, step A, step B, step C, the more likely it is that the human and the agent are going to execute it effectively. And the more ambiguous, the more amorphous it is. It's like, well, if it's this and if it's that and if it's that, that's going to get harder, right? And I think we sort of had this idea that somehow agents were going to miraculously be better at it because somewhere deep in there were these deep hidden patterns, and that may eventually be true, but it's going to take a whole lot of very specific training to get there. So, I took a look at this, and I maybe I should be more, but I'm not actually that critical of it. To your point, I think that what this is a very honest and fair assessment as to the current state. And to their credit, the whole purpose of this was that the current benchmarks, because we sort of railed against this in the past, right? That there's a lot of these AI benchmarks that sort of say that how well these AI agents are working, and they often come across as glowing successes.
Mm-hmm.
And the point of this research was to say, from an enterprise perspective, almost all of that research or all those benchmarks right now are based on B2C use cases. They're based on pretty simplistic use cases. And so maybe we shouldn't take these glowing assessments quite at face value. Mm-hmm. And so to their credit, that's what they're pointing out here. And of course, exposing that there's a lot of work to be done, including in their own platform. But again, I think we would find that this is not specific to ChatGPT. It's certainly not specific to Agentforce. This is something that I think this is the state of the sector right now. And so, as if you're a CIO, you need to go in knowing this, that right. you need to be well clearly defined on your business logic, on your workflows, and have very clear an understanding of what you're trying to accomplish if you want to find success with it.
But right, because we're seeing with say generative AI, we can use LLM just fine. If you ask a basic question, you will probably get the answer that you're looking for. But we make the mistake of thinking that because we can do this kind of search engine-ish use, that's the best way to use LLMs, which is first not true. And then second, we make the mistake of sometimes thinking because we can do that one thing that it will be useful for, just to name a couple of additional use cases here, like named entity disambiguation. Doing that disambiguation across different data sets where you might have 10 different fields that are all named department and trying to figure out which one is the right thing for what you're looking for. That is something where LLMs are going to struggle unless you do further agentic training and custom prompting and grounding to figure out what exactly the context is and what you're looking for. That is going to require some actual work on the IT office's part.
Yeah, and I do think this is another example where there's a rationalization process that I think most enterprise leaders aren't yet prepared for. You're going to have there's this balancing act, because this isn't magic. You don't just throw an agent at it and go, it's going to magically makes this all work. You have to look at it and decide, is the effort to train it? In some cases, the effort to train the agent is going to outweigh the cost of just solving the problem in traditional mechanisms and manners, right? And so you have to weigh that out. And a lot of it is going to be, how widespread is this, or how long-standing is this issue? If it's going to continue, then it's worth that investment, because really building a capability. And that's really what I tell people when we think about agentic solutions, is you need to be thinking about a capability. Is it worth actually building that as a resource? What I think is shocking or striking with this is, so I think the research, I actually applaud the research. I think it's well-grounded. I think it is the right story we need to be telling as far as getting real with where this is at. But the juxtaposition with them with this sort of breathy announcement about how great everything is and why we're scaling it up and raising the prices in light of that very real truth was a little shocking to me, because I think they're raising the prices. To be honest, I went through this announcement twice, and even as someone in the space, it was confusing as heck to me to figure out what they're actually charging for any of this. And exactly where that lands. But from all indications are they're raising the prices, and it's super tough to sort of figure out exactly what it's going to cost you. So
right, you've got these $125 per user per month Agentforce add-ons, or you have Agentforce One editions, which I assuming are the whole enchilada, starting at $550 per user per month if you want to get the most comprehensive suite on the 1 million flex credits per organization per year, and being able to create more custom agents that are able to use X number of credits to do X, Y, Z. I think part of the complexity here is that agents often, because you don't quite know how many credits or tokens or calls necessarily you're going to be using when you ask an agent to do something, they're still having trouble figuring out how to either ground that or to price that correctly without adding a fuzzy usage layer that is hard to track or to estimate.
Yeah, well, it is interesting, and it speaks to, I think, one of the quotes in here is that I lost it here. Bill Patel. So I'm actually referencing a quote by Glenn McCracken on LinkedIn, who just sort of went off on this. He happened to identify these exact same two things: this announcement from Salesforce about the pricing and the research, and he just went on a riff on it. We can put the link in the show notes here, but he quotes Bill Patterson, the EVP of CRM, who says, anyone who thinks they figured out AI pricing is kidding themselves. And I think that's really what's going on, is that it's so hard. So as a refresher, Salesforce had a consumption-based model. That's what they were doing. And so they're shifting this into this more fixed price model, sort of. But it's still extremely confusing to try to figure out exactly what that's going to look like.
True. It's not good. Yeah, it's definitely going to be a challenge to figure out what AI should actually be priced at. I actually am hoping that at some point platforms figure out how to, call it, throttle their own agents to some extent so that you can have more predictable performance and then pricing, because not every agentic call requires your absolute 100% best effort to get the right answer. And we need to get a better idea of, sometimes you're asking a simple question, you should just be able to get the answer you're looking for.
It is funny you say it, and I'm in a little bit of a riff here, because we don't have that much on this particular episode. But there's all these different models, and all the major players are in fact releasing low-cost models. Microsoft has an entire library of small language models. We have all these different versions that can help with that. What I haven't seen a whole lot of research around is any approach that allows you to dynamically. Somebody did announce something recently. I can't remember who it was, but this idea of dynamically being able to interpret the prompt and potentially select that lower cost model to respond to it. I think that's going to be the ultimate holy grail. Because like right now, I have access to dozens of models.
Yeah.
But I have to go manually switch between them, and that's a pain in the butt. No one's going to do that, right? And I think these usage parameters it's really tough. And I think what makes AI particularly challenging, again, I'm speaking for someone who owns this from a software company side, is that you are sitting here trying to guess what that usage is going to be. And the better your product is, potentially that means the more usage you're going to see, because people go, oh, this is great. I can use it for this. I can use it for that. And off they go. And suddenly your costs skyrocket. And yet what are customers expecting? They're expecting a normalized cost. And so you're trying to find this balance point where it's not this prohibitive price, but you're delivering it in a solution that makes sense. And it's just really hard. And so that's why I am empathetic with Salesforce's plight, but they sort of can't help themselves with just how over the top they get with it. But it's kind of fun.
Yeah, I think ultimately we're going to have to figure out these trade-offs. Every platform is going to have to, every normal software platform is going to have to figure out its hub of models, do some additional testing on the back end, and figure out what fits well. Because when you look at some of these numbers, just in the benchmarking for that Salesforce did, you like something like Llama 3 for 70 billion parameters is 30% for workflows, 33% for 405 billion, parameters. So, 6 times larger model for 3% improvement when you're talking 30 versus 33%. Like, that's not a really big improvement for what you're paying there. So there's got to be some rationalization for capabilities like that.
And as we said a million times, we'll say it again, we are at the beginning of this process. It is still incredibly nascent. And I think this is just yet another example of that. So this is sort of the inside baseball side of it, right? This is the software company's dilemma of having to solve this. And so if you're the CIO, if you're the enterprise IT leader, you're sort of on the receiving end of this. But let's talk about the other side. How do you deal with the adoption of AI, and how do you sort of rationalize? We led the show with this conversation about the Pope and the fact that it introduced all these sort of cultural dynamics that we need to be aware of. There are a couple of interesting pieces of research here. One that you identified in an article, I guess it's not really research, but an article that I pulled together. And it was interesting how they sort of hit the yin and yang here of this. The one, and I happened to see this one across too, I thought it was fascinating. So the first is a piece of research that basically these researchers looked at I guess they're calling cognitive debt, but this idea that if people started using ChatGPT, and this wasn't really specific, they use ChatGPT, but theoretically any LLM would do this, or any generative AI model would do this, that it actually caused a negative impact on their ability to perform cognitively. And so there's sort of this idea of, well, we have to be careful of how this is being leveraged. And then the flip side, and I think we need to talk about these because they're sort of two sides of the same coin, is this article from the Financial Times. It talked about that AI alone can't solve the productivity puzzle. It's the name of it. And it basically talks about how, in fact, I even highlighted that AI is fabulous, or at least LLMs right now are fabulous at dealing with these sort of routine things, but they're really accelerators of that. And what they miss is the ability of sort of taking the next leap. And it says, a model, I'll just quote some of this because it was fascinating, right? A model trained before Galileo would have parroted a geocentric universe, fed 19th century texts, that would have proved human flight impossible before the Wright brothers succeeded, right? And on and on and on. That right now, that's what they're trained on, but they don't know what's not possible yet, right? And so you sort of put these two together and you can see the irony of the risk that AI potentially poses, that it creates this endless loop. And I think as a CIO whose job is to figure out how you put AI to use in your organization, this is the guts of it right here, right? Getting this right. and figuring out how to leverage it effectively to create advantage is going to be critical. So what was your take on these two?
Yeah, starting with the idea of cognitive debt. So there's a study done by some scientists to first ask basically one group of people to use LLMs 3 times to write an essay, and then asked another group of people to write 3 essays the normal way, like a human being, write it or type it. And then the fourth time, they switched each one. So the people writing 3 essays used LLMs, were able to use LLMs for the fourth, while the people who had only been using LLMs the first 3 times had to write a manual essay the fourth time. And the people doing it for the fourth, people who had to make that switch from LLM to writing, like they lost part of their brain, basically. They were less able to write essays. They were less able to quote their own work that they had written. Like they were just losing working memory associated with presenting what their own thoughts were because of the shortcuts associated with the LLMs. So I think it's just a precautionary tale that we can't lean on LLMs for everything. It can't use it as a crutch. We have to use it as a tool. We should be using LLMs to counter and to really critique what we do, rather than simply taking what it does at face value and taking that as an end-all be-all.
So there are a couple of interesting points. Is this research calls out that they did not break this down and look at sort of the component structure of essay writing, right? They did not look at, were people using it just for ideation? Were they using it for actual content generation? What were they using it for? And I think that matters. So that's the first point.
Right.
But the second point of it is, I think, to me, I think it's a valid cautionary note, meaning that as an employer, if we're looking at this organizationally, I think we need to be deliberate with how we leverage AI and recognize that I find the cognitive piece of this fascinating, and I don't want to discount it out of hand. But I also make it sort of akin to like GPS, right? So I grew up, I'm going to date myself, in the age of Thomas guides, right? And I'm from LA, right? Where I had to carry around 4 of them because I would, one map wasn't big enough to carry it all, were these big books of maps. And I knew LA like the back of my hand because I drove all over, and you would have to look at the map and orient yourself and go through this whole process. And it was a cognitive load. I had to really process and think and associate with landmarks and all of this process. And that's great. I can still navigate in my sleep around all of LA because of it. I go any place else today. I live in New York. I don't own a car anymore. But if I go any place and I have a car, what do I have? I have a GPS system. And I cannot tell you the number of times where it's like I drive from the hotel to wherever I'm going, and I wake up or not wake up, but I look up and I realize I had no idea how I got here.
Yeah.
And the question is, does it matter? Is it actually useful for me to know how to navigate a city if I have this tool? Now, they're going to be purists and say, of course you should. I think there's a lot of things in our society today, in our modern society, that we as humans no longer know how to do. At least most of us don't know how to do, because we've deployed technology that does so much of that for us. Like God forbid, if there's some catastrophe, I'm going to come to your house because I can't grow a crop to save my life. I probably can't hunt anymore. I'm going to starve, right? I cannot raise my own food.
Yeah.
And I think there's a whole lot of things like this. And so part of me sees this as alarmist, because there's no question that AI is going to fundamentally change the nature of work, of how we interact and the things we have to do. But part of me says, is this a cause of concern? Like I said, I don't want to dismiss it out of hand, but I think, to me, the wake-up call for me is that we need to be intentful and aware and make sure that if we're going to deploy AI for this, especially based on this research, that we're okay maybe giving up the skill set because we may in fact lose it over time as an employee base. So
yeah, I think this sets some fundamental and kind of philosophical questions on what is meaningful from a work perspective. For instance, filling out an expense report, I consider that to be a meaningless task. And I say that as someone who literally runs a company. Like, I never want anybody to fill out any more paperwork than necessary to get anything done. I consider that entire thing a waste of time, other than we have to do it for tax reasons. But I don't care if you ever memorize how an expense report is done. I would be happy to have AI take over that 100% for everybody forevermore, for any reason. Whereas there are aspects of being able to write down how to do something or how to think through a problem that are vital. If you cannot learn from, say, a YouTube video and then being able to independently recreate how to do that because it's now going to be part of your job, that's a problem, because it means you don't really know how to learn something. And we have to figure out which aspects are actually important, which aspects are busy work or stupid work, or just happen once a year and don't really need to be memorized. But we do have to, but this might mean that we have to actually promote some work that we think of as not trivial in some aspects, because the mental ability associated with doing that trivial work ends up being important to the rest of the job in some way.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the hard part. I think so. I don't disagree with anything you said, right? I completely agree with that, and I think that's sort of the point of this Financial Times article, is that the limited AI, at least the AI version that we've talked a lot about the fact that LLMs and generative AI are probably not the end, and that this is the reason they're not the end, right? Is that they are captive to their own data set, and that data set is in fact restrictive insofar as it's our known universe. It's a massive, but it's our unknown universe, and it doesn't know what we haven't yet created. And so because of that, at least as of yet, we have not really truly seen any emergent capabilities coming out of this technology to create genuinely new thought. Mm-hmm. And so that is going to remain the purview of humans. And so I completely agree with you that we need to guard that, right? And that exists on a bunch of different dimensions: intellectual, emotional, empathetic, all these different levels. Mm-hmm. The question, though, and the challenge, I think, in front of folks is to actually have that discernment of what part of this job is in fact truly important to me being successful in creating that value, and which parts are in fact, I can automate them and never, it's perfectly fine if I never have to think that again. And while I think everyone in the entire known universe will agree with you on expense reports, I literally am like 4 months behind on mine, like since I started, because I hate the concept of doing it entirely, completely. And I think everyone would probably also likely agree on the really fun parts of our job that are really critical thinking heavy and creative and all that. It's the stuff in the middle that's going to be really hard to figure out. And, like as someone that came from service management, and obviously we have a service management product in the market, I can think of all these people that are dyed-in-the-wool service management people and thinking that their knowledge and understanding of the difference between an incident and a problem is just vital to their career. And I'm like, is it? Is that what we're going to hang our hat on, right? And maybe it is, maybe, I don't know. But the point is those are going to be the battles we have to fight out. And I think as a CIO or as an enterprise organization is deciding where to apply that. And then there's the sequencing of where do you apply it first, right? Where do you actually apply this to solve problems right now? And so I think it's going to be this interesting space. And I think what's exciting to me, the Salesforce research notwithstanding, is while there's still a lot of gap in terms of its efficacy and execution today, we're dramatically and rapidly closing that window and closing that gap. And this is going to be very real, very, very fast.
True.
Okay. So we end on a light one or fun one, or try to, and this one isn't actually either light or fun. It's just bewildering to me. I guess I'm out of it and you're leaving the analyst business, so we don't care anymore, because God forbid if anyone's tried to sell anything to Broadcom, because we are not very nice to them, but I think they deserve it. So the last article that we want to talk about today is from the Register, Hyoun's one of his favorite places.
Oh, yeah.
Talking about Broadcom's response. If you haven't been following along or haven't been watching the show, of course, Broadcom acquired VMware and introduced new pricing and got people very upset about it. And there's all this sort of talk about where they're going to back off. And I think we now have the answer that they are most certainly not backing off, and apparently being rewarded for it. So you want to cue it up here?
Yes. So Broadcom has obviously been raising prices, sometimes 5, 10, 15 times. But apparently, Broadcom's CEO, Hock Tan, said that this month that 87% of VMware's top 10,000 customers have signed up for VMware Cloud Foundation. So at the end of the day, the biggest customers, 87% of them ponied up and paid the price. And for those who complained that the price might be too much, their CTO basically said, well, maybe you should just use more of the VMware Cloud Foundation components, and then you'd get more value for what you paid for. Well,
So,
why didn't I just
I mean, I think there's two factors here. I think the first is that these largest companies, right? And in fairness, this was their play all along: go after their biggest companies and to sort of get that economy of scale with Broadcom. These larger companies are the ones that are most likely to already be using multiple parts of the suite. So therefore, the bundling and whatever sort of makes more sense, and they can get the value out of it. I think the other factor is I've talked a long time. I've talked several times, I think, about the fact that I used to run these executive dinners with this bunch of CIOs, and I had this rule that there are two words we would never utter, and that was SAP and Oracle, because it would put us down this whole thing where everyone would complain about it. But the reality is they complained about it all the time, but they still did business. They never actually changed anything because the switching cost was so high. The pain and suffering was just not worth the return on it. And so it was sort of golden handcuffs where they just renewed every year, and it didn't make any difference. And I think we're seeing the same thing here. I mean, I think we'll see some attrition, but I think that Broadcom made a wise, I guess, at least from your perspective, but a wise bet in that these customers were not going to be willing to go through the pain and suffering of switching, that they'll just pay more and keep using it. And that's exactly what's happening. And so, from a pure financial standpoint, okay, but it's the feeling if I was going to do a dinner again, I think I'd have to add Broadcom to my list of forbidden words.
Yeah, so one of the things I learned in my MBA pricing class is that when you're doing B2C, business to consumer pricing, you're always aiming for a smile. Like the customer should be happy with what you get. With B2B, you're going for just a flat face. Like you're not really happy, you're not really sad. And I've always thought as Oracle as being the epitome of that with the Oracle database, but Broadcom might be coming into the lead right now with their expert pricing capabilities. And ironically, at a time when I think Oracle Cloud is actually quite flexible to work with, like who thought that somebody would out Oracle net?
Yeah, so I think that the difference is you want to smile in consumer. When it comes to business, you just want them not pissed off enough to be willing to change. Yes. And I think Broadcom is managing to just absolutely walk this razor's edge of getting right to that point and not going over it. And it's remarkable. And look, I think Oracle, here's the deal with Oracle. I think Oracle came under pressure, right? I mean, Oracle is still a beast, but they, in a lot of their other spaces, they came under pretty severe pressure. And so they've had to sort of change their posture a bit. And look and this, I guess, all joking and incredulity aside, my real frustration here is, look, at the end of the day, I'm an advocate of the technology space. I think the world is better that Oracle is in a competitive landscape and now is having to innovate and having to be customer facing and customer forward. And I think that's good. I think that when we have these monopolies and these technologies where it's just stagnated and the company doesn't have to do anything, it's bad for everything. It's bad for the industry. It's bad for the technology companies. It's bad for innovation. And so that's my real frustration with this, is that I'm the ultimate optimist when it comes to the power of this technology. And I want to have an environment in which we are collectively incented to make the best technology we can and to deliver results for it. And this sort of stuff just rubs me the wrong way because it's the opposite of that. But
true. Although it makes our lives difficult, well, especially your life right now, Charlie, in the software world, where you're competing against each other and bashing each other's brains in, that competition is better for the customer at the end of the day.
It is. Yeah. I mean, I hate taking the knocks and I hate being outmaneuvered if that were to happen. But at the end of the day, it's how we move forward and it's how we progress. And it's, we need to be out there. We need to be listening. And really, it's not, to me, it's rarely about the competition, but it is about the fact that our competition is in a race with us to shape the mind of our customers and to help guide them. And that causes the customers to be, thinking critically about what their needs are and where they can go. And it puts pressure on us to innovate, to try to go to where they haven't thought of going yet, and transforming things for the better for them. So it's a challenge, but that's what makes it fun. That's why I'm in this business to begin with. That's why I fell in love with technology. And so I want to see that perpetuated, not stagnated.
There you go. Technology optimist, Charlie Araujo, right there. And on that note, thank you so much for joining us for another week of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Charlie, enjoy your Mets game. Good luck.
Thank you. Always the optimist.
Yes, and please feel free to like, subscribe, comment, and let us know what you enjoyed and what you want us to take on for next week. Take care.